In October 1923, demolition workers tearing down the abandoned St. Catherine's boarding school in Millbrook, Connecticut discovered something that would haunt the small town for generations. Behind a false wall in the basement, they found 12 small wooden boxes, each containing the personal belongings of children who had supposedly transferred to other institutions decades earlier. Hair ribbons, pocket watches, hand-carved toys, and letters never sent home. Between 1887 and 1895, 12 children had vanished from this prestigious Catholic boarding school, and what the Pemberton family tried to bury for 28 years could no longer remain hidden. Before we descend into this dark chapter of American history, this story isn't for everyone. Only for those brave enough to confront the most sinister secrets that respected institutions tried to suppress. If you're ready to join our community of truth seekers who demand answers to history's darkest mysteries, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from. We're building a global network of people who refuse to let these stories stay buried. The Pemberton family arrived in Millbrook in 1882, carrying impeccable credentials and sterling references from Catholic institutions across New England. Father Matthias Pemberton, a tall man with piercing blue eyes and prematurely silver hair, possessed the kind of commanding presence that inspired immediate trust. His wife, Constance, was the picture of Victorian propriety, always dressed in dark fabrics with her graying hair pulled severely back. Their son Edgar, 24, and built like a labour despite his education, served as the school's groundskeeper and maintenance supervisor. Their daughter Lucinda, barely 16 but with an unsettling maturity in her green eyes, helped with the younger children's daily care. St. Catherine's had been struggling financially when the Pembertons arrived with their proposal to transform it into New England's premier boarding institution for wealthy Catholic families. Father Pemberton's vision was compelling, a place where troubled or unwanted children from affluent backgrounds could receive both rigorous education and moral rehabilitation away from the corrupting influences of modern society. The local bishop, impressed by Pemberton's theological knowledge and his family's apparent devotion, granted them full administrative control. The transformation was remarkable. Within months, the crumbling Victorian mansion that housed the school received extensive renovations. New dormitories were constructed, a modern kitchen installed, and the grounds landscaped to rival any estate in Connecticut. Parents from Boston, New York, and Philadelphia began sending their most challenging children to St. Catherine's, drawn by reports of miraculous behavioral improvements and glowing testimonials that seemed too good to be true. What made the Pembertons particularly appealing to desperate parents was their willingness to accept the children that other institutions had rejected. The violent, the disturbed, the uncontrollable offspring of powerful families who needed their problems quietly managed. Father Pemberton spoke eloquently about divine redemption and the power of structured discipline to transform even the most wayward souls. He charged premium rates for this specialized service, and parents paid gladly for the promise of having their family scandals discreetly resolved. The school's daily routine reflected Father Pemberton's philosophy of strict order and moral discipline. Children rose at 5 in the morning for prayers, followed by a sparse breakfast and 6 hours of rigorous academic instruction. Afternoons were devoted to manual labor designed to build character, while evenings included additional prayer sessions and mandatory confession. Any deviation from this schedule resulted in what Father Pemberton called corrective isolation, time spent alone in specially constructed basement rooms for reflection and penitence. Local townspeople spoke admiringly of the Pemberton family's dedication to transforming troubled youth. The children who occasionally accompanied the family to Sunday Mass appeared well-behaved and properly groomed, though observers noted they seemed unusually quiet and deferential. When asked about specific students, Father Pemberton would speak warmly about their progress while emphasizing the need for complete isolation from previous negative influences during their rehabilitation period. The first warning sign that something was amiss came in March 1887, when Mrs. Eleanor Walsh received a letter supposedly from her 10-year-old son Timothy, informing her that he had been selected for transfer to a special advanced program at a seminary in California. The letter, written in Timothy's careful script, expressed his excitement about this opportunity and his understanding that communication would be limited during his intensive religious studies. Mrs. Walsh, whose husband had recently died leaving her overwhelmed with financial difficulties, felt guilty relief that Timothy's educational future was secured. Similar letters began arriving at other households over the following months. Parents received notices about exceptional opportunities for their children, advanced placement programs, specialized academies, even missionary work appropriate for young people of strong faith. Each letter bore the child's handwriting and expressed enthusiasm for their new path, along with explanations for why regular correspondence would be impossible. The timing always seemed fortuitous, arriving just when parents were struggling with their own crises or when the children's behavioral problems had become particularly burdensome. Father Pemberton's reputation continued to grow throughout New England's Catholic communities. Bishops praised his innovative approaches to juvenile rehabilitation, while wealthy benefactors donated generously to support his work. The school's enrollment remained mysteriously stable despite the frequent transfers, with new troubled children arriving to replace those who had moved on to other opportunities. Local officials, including Sheriff Marcus DeWitt, spoke glowingly of how the Pemberton family had brought prestige and prosperity to Millbrook while solving the problems of families throughout the region. The Pemberton family's rise to prominence in Millbrook had been carefully orchestrated over decades of patient manipulation and strategic positioning within Catholic institutional hierarchies. Father Matthias Pemberton's credentials, while impressive on paper, concealed a darker history of failed appointments and quietly hushed scandals at previous postings. His theological education at Seminary of Our Lady of Angels in Baltimore had been cut short not due to academic excellence, as he claimed, but because of disturbing reports about his interactions with younger seminarians that the church preferred to handle through reassignment rather than investigation. Constance Pemberton brought her own shadowy past to their union. Born Constance Hartwell to a family of morticians in Salem, Massachusetts, she had demonstrated an unusual comfort with death and decay from childhood. Her siblings later recalled her disturbing fascination with their father's embalming process and her ability to remain unnaturally calm around corpses. When she married Matthias in 1855, she brought not only her inheritance from the family funeral business but also practical knowledge that would prove invaluable in their future endeavors. Their son Edgar had been shaped by his parents' influence from birth. Unlike other children who might recoil from violence or death, Edgar had been systematically desensitized to suffering through carefully orchestrated experiences disguised as character building. By age 12, he was assisting his mother with what she called specimen preservation, learning techniques for handling and disposing of organic materials. His formal education included not only traditional subjects but also practical skills in construction, chemistry, and what his father euphemistically termed problem solving. Lucinda represented the most disturbing aspect of the family's evolution. Born into their operations, she had never known a world where deception, manipulation, and violence were not normalized daily experiences. Her childhood games involved practicing the facial expressions and vocal tones needed to comfort distressed children, while her adolescent education focused on identifying psychological vulnerabilities in potential victims. By 16, she possessed an uncanny ability to gain the trust of frightened children while simultaneously assessing their value for the family's purposes. The choice of St. Catherine's as their base of operations reflected careful strategic planning rather than mere opportunity. The school's isolated location provided natural privacy, while its Catholic affiliation offered protective respectability that discouraged outside scrutiny. The building's Victorian architecture included features that could be modified for specialized purposes, particularly the extensive basement areas that Edgar quickly recognized as ideal for soundproofing and secure containment. Most importantly, the school's existing reputation for accepting troubled children meant that behavioral changes, emotional distress, and even disappearances could be easily explained as part of the rehabilitation process. Their integration into Millbrook's community followed a methodical pattern of relationship building and strategic alliance formation. Father Pemberton cultivated friendships with influential townspeople through theological discussions and charitable contributions, while Constance established herself among the ladies' social circles through her apparent devotion to good works. Edgar's physical strength and practical skills made him valuable for community projects, while Lucinda's demure charm endeared her to adults who saw her as an example of proper Christian upbringing. The corruption of Sheriff Marcus DeWitt proved essential to their long-term success. A widower struggling with gambling debts and a growing alcohol problem, DeWitt was vulnerable to the Pembertons' combination of financial assistance and social acceptance. Father Pemberton began by offering pastoral counseling for the sheriff's personal problems, gradually escalating to small loans that became larger financial obligations. By 1886, DeWitt was thoroughly compromised, dependent on Pemberton money and terrified of exposure of his mounting debts and drinking. This network of complicity extended beyond individual corruption to institutional capture. The local Catholic hierarchy, already predisposed to trust and protect clergy, accepted Father Pemberton's reports without question. His detailed documentation of student progress, complete with forged letters and fabricated testimonials, created an administrative paper trail that satisfied bureaucratic requirements while concealing the reality of what occurred within St. Catherine's walls. When questions did arise, his reputation for handling difficult cases ensured that concerns were dismissed as misunderstandings or exaggerations. The financial structure of their operation demonstrated sophisticated planning that went far beyond simple tuition collection. Wealthy parents paid premium rates for specialized services, but the real profits came from what Father Pemberton termed estate optimization. Children from affluent families often arrived with valuable personal property, from jewelry to trust fund documentation, that could be liquidated through carefully managed channels. More significantly, some families paid additional fees for what they believed were enhanced security measures to prevent their children from ever revealing family secrets or returning to cause future embarrassment. If this investigation into America's hidden darkness is resonating with you, we need your support to continue uncovering these suppressed stories. Hit that like button to help us reach more people who deserve to know the truth about institutions they trusted. Share this video with friends who can handle these revelations, and don't forget to subscribe with notifications on so you never miss our deep dives into history's most carefully guarded secrets. Timothy Walsh's arrival at St. Catherine's in February 1887 marked the beginning of what would become the Pemberton family's most systematic period of operation. The 10-year-old boy had been sent by his recently widowed mother, who could no longer manage his increasingly violent outbursts following his father's sudden death. Timothy's behavioral problems, combined with his mother's desperate financial situation and social isolation, made him an ideal candidate for what Father Pemberton privately called their special program. The selection process that identified Timothy as suitable for permanent removal had been refined through months of careful observation and psychological assessment. Father Pemberton had developed what he termed a vulnerability index, evaluating each child based on family stability, emotional attachments, behavioral patterns, and most critically, the likelihood that their disappearance would prompt serious investigation. Timothy scored highest in every category. His mother was overwhelmed and guilt-ridden, he had no siblings or close relatives, his violent episodes had alienated potential allies, and his family's recent financial collapse meant they lacked resources for prolonged searches. The initial phase of Timothy's processing followed established protocols designed to maximize psychological control while minimizing resistance. Upon arrival, he was isolated from other students under the pretext of a quarantine period to prevent the spread of disruptive behaviors. This isolation served multiple purposes. It prevented him from forming alliances with other children, allowed the family to study his psychological responses, and began the gradual erosion of his connection to his previous identity. Father Pemberton conducted daily counseling sessions that were actually interrogations designed to identify Timothy's deepest fears and strongest emotional attachments. Constance Pemberton's role during this phase involved what she called maternal replacement therapy. She presented herself as a loving mother figure who understood Timothy's pain and offered comfort that his real mother had been unable to provide. Through carefully timed acts of kindness followed by deliberate withdrawal of affection, she created a psychological dependency that made Timothy desperate for her approval. This emotional manipulation was essential for ensuring compliance during the later stages of their process. Edgar's contribution to Timothy's processing involved the physical preparation of specialized containment facilities. The basement rooms that Father Pemberton described as spaces for reflection and penitence had been extensively modified with soundproofing materials, reinforced locks, and ventilation systems that could be controlled from outside. Edgar had also installed what he called behavioral modification equipment, including restraint systems and sensory deprivation apparatus that could be used to break down psychological resistance through controlled suffering. Lucinda's assignment required her to establish a friendship with Timothy that would serve as both emotional manipulation and intelligence gathering. Her apparent age and practiced innocence made her the perfect confidant for a frightened child desperate for human connection. Through carefully guided conversations, she extracted information about Timothy's family relationships, his fears about his future, and most importantly, details about his mother's financial situation and social connections that could be exploited if she became problematic. The transformation of Timothy from a living child into a profitable resource began with what Father Pemberton termed identity dissolution. This process involved systematically destroying Timothy's sense of self through a combination of psychological torture, physical deprivation, and social isolation. His name was replaced with a number, his personal possessions were confiscated and destroyed, and his memories of life before St. Catherine's were challenged and contradicted until he began to question his own recollections. The fabrication of Timothy's transfer letter required careful attention to detail that would satisfy his mother's expectations while preventing future investigation. Constance Pemberton, whose penmanship skills had been honed through years of forging documents, spent weeks practicing Timothy's handwriting until she could replicate it perfectly. The letter's content was designed to appeal to Mrs. Walsh's religious faith and financial anxieties, presenting the transfer as a divine opportunity that would secure Timothy's future while relieving her of an overwhelming burden. The financial aspects of Timothy's case established protocols that would be refined with subsequent victims. His mother's tuition payments were collected in advance, creating a buffer period during which questions about his whereabouts could be deflected. More significantly, Timothy had arrived with a gold pocket watch inherited from his grandfather, along with documentation of a small trust fund established for his education. These assets were gradually liquidated through intermediaries, with the proceeds contributing to the family's growing wealth. The disposal of Timothy's physical remains followed procedures that Edgar had developed through experimentation with animal carcasses and consultation with his mother's mortuary knowledge. The basement facilities included areas specifically designed for what he termed organic processing, utilizing chemical treatment and controlled decomposition that would eliminate evidence while recovering any valuable materials. The entire process was designed to ensure that no trace of Timothy's physical existence would ever be discovered. By March 1887, Timothy Walsh had effectively ceased to exist as anything more than a forged letter and a few fabricated documents. His mother, consumed by grief and financial desperation, accepted the explanation of his transfer with guilty relief. The other children at St. Catherine's were told that Timothy had been moved to a different program, while staff members received bonuses for their discretion regarding student transfers. Father Pemberton began identifying the next candidate for their special program, confident that their methods had been perfected through Timothy's successful processing. The success of Timothy Walsh's elimination prompted immediate refinements to the Pemberton family's operational procedures. Father Pemberton convened what he called family councils, systematic reviews of each phase of their process to identify inefficiencies and reduce risks. These meetings, held in the soundproofed basement conference room that Edgar had constructed, became weekly gatherings where the family analyzed their methods with the cold precision of business executives optimizing production processes. The most significant improvement involved victim selection criteria. Timothy's case had revealed that children with deceased fathers were ideal candidates, but the family realized they could expand their target pool by focusing on specific family dysfunction patterns. Constance Pemberton developed what she termed the Family Stability Assessment, a systematic evaluation of each child's home situation that identified optimal candidates for permanent removal. Children from families dealing with mental illness, financial collapse, or social scandal scored highest on her assessment scale. Edgar's technical innovations during this period transformed the basement facilities into what resembled a sophisticated processing center. Drawing on his mother's mortuary knowledge and his own mechanical aptitude, he designed systems that could handle multiple subjects simultaneously while maintaining complete operational security. The rooms were equipped with drainage systems that connected to a private septic field he had excavated beyond the school grounds, while ventilation improvements ensured that no sounds or odors would betray the activities conducted below. The development of specialized restraint and conditioning equipment represented Edgar's most disturbing contributions to their evolving methodology. Working with materials acquired through seemingly legitimate construction projects, he created apparatus designed to maintain subjects in various states of physical and psychological distress. These devices could be adjusted based on the specific requirements of each case, allowing for customized treatment protocols that maximized both information extraction and behavioral modification. Lucinda's role evolved beyond simple intelligence gathering to encompass what Father Pemberton termed emotional engineering. Her natural talent for manipulation was enhanced through systematic study of child psychology texts that her father acquired from seminary libraries. She learned to identify and exploit specific psychological vulnerabilities, creating artificial emotional dependencies that could be leveraged during processing. Her ability to maintain a facade of innocence while conducting sophisticated psychological operations made her invaluable for both victim recruitment and information gathering. The family's document fabrication capabilities expanded significantly during this period. Constance Pemberton established relationships with corrupt officials in multiple jurisdictions, creating a network of individuals who could provide authentic official documents for the right price. Birth certificates, death certificates, transfer authorizations, and travel permits could be obtained or modified to support whatever narrative the family required for each case. This documentation network became essential for creating convincing cover stories that would satisfy both families and potential investigators. Financial optimization protocols were refined based on lessons learned from Timothy's case. The family realized that their profits could be maximized not just through tuition collection and asset liquidation, but through strategic exploitation of each family's specific financial vulnerabilities. Parents desperate to hide family scandals would pay premium rates for guaranteed silence, while those facing financial ruin could be manipulated into signing over additional assets in exchange for promises of their children's future security. The integration of legitimate students into their operation required careful management to maintain the school's respectable facade. Father Pemberton developed a tiered system that classified students based on their potential value and risk factors. Legitimate students from prominent families were treated well and received quality education, serving as testimonials to the school's excellence. Problem students with limited family connections were evaluated for potential processing, while those with intermediate risk profiles were maintained as a buffer population that could be manipulated if necessary. Sheriff DeWitt's corruption deepened during this period as the family expanded his involvement in their operations. Beyond providing protection from investigation, DeWitt began actively participating in evidence suppression and witness intimidation. His official position allowed him to redirect inquiries, lose paperwork, and ensure that any suspicious activities were attributed to legitimate law enforcement operations. The family's financial support for his gambling debts and alcohol dependency ensured his complete cooperation and silence. The establishment of external disposal networks marked a significant evolution in their operational sophistication. Edgar developed relationships with individuals in neighboring states who could assist with the final disposition of evidence and materials. These contacts, recruited through careful cultivation within criminal networks, provided services ranging from document destruction to chemical disposal that extended the family's operational reach beyond Connecticut's borders. Quality control measures were implemented to prevent the kind of operational errors that could expose their activities. Each case was now subjected to multiple review stages, with detailed documentation of every step in the process. This systematic approach reduced the risk of oversight or mistakes while creating an organizational structure that could be scaled up as their operation expanded. The family maintained detailed records of their procedures, victim profiles, and financial transactions, creating a comprehensive database of their criminal enterprise. The psychological conditioning of family members themselves became a priority as their operation grew more sophisticated. Father Pemberton recognized that maintaining operational security required absolute commitment from all participants, achieved through systematic desensitization to violence and moral corruption. Regular exposure to increasingly disturbing activities, combined with ideological justification based on distorted religious concepts, ensured that no family member would develop conscience-based resistance to their methods. By the end of 1887, the Pemberton family had transformed from opportunistic criminals into a highly organized criminal enterprise capable of systematic victim processing. Their refined methodologies, expanded network of corruption, and sophisticated operational procedures positioned them to significantly increase the scale and efficiency of their activities during the years that followed. The period between 1888 and 1891 represented the peak of the Pemberton family's criminal operations, during which they achieved what Father Pemberton privately termed optimal efficiency in their systematic elimination of unwanted children. The refinements implemented after Timothy Walsh's successful processing had created a sophisticated machine capable of handling multiple cases simultaneously while maintaining complete operational security and community respectability. During this period, 7 children disappeared from St. Catherine's through carefully orchestrated transfer scenarios that followed the protocols perfected during Timothy's case. Each victim was selected based on Constance Pemberton's enhanced family stability assessment, which now included detailed psychological profiles and risk evaluations that virtually guaranteed successful elimination without investigation. The victims included Margaret Thornfield, age 9, whose alcoholic mother gladly accepted her transfer to a convent school in California, David Ashworth, 11, whose gambling-addicted father signed away his parental rights in exchange for debt forgiveness, and Sarah Blackwood, 8, whose institutionalized mother never questioned her daughter's supposed selection for a special missionary program. The basement facilities had been expanded into what Edgar proudly called a complete processing center, featuring specialized rooms for different phases of victim handling. The intake area included soundproofed cells for initial isolation and psychological assessment, while the conditioning chambers were equipped with apparatus designed to break down resistance through carefully controlled physical and psychological torture. The final processing areas contained Edgar's most sophisticated equipment for evidence elimination, including chemical treatment facilities and cremation apparatus that left no trace of organic materials. Lucinda's evolution during this period was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the family's development. Now 19 and possessed of remarkable psychological manipulation skills, she had become the primary interface between the family and their victims during the crucial early stages of processing. Her ability to establish emotional connections with frightened children while simultaneously evaluating their psychological vulnerabilities made her invaluable for reducing resistance and extracting useful information. She maintained detailed psychological profiles of each victim that guided the family's customized elimination procedures. The financial success of their operation during this peak period was extraordinary. Beyond the premium tuition payments collected from desperate families, the Pembertons had developed multiple revenue streams that maximized the profit potential of each case. Victim assets were systematically liquidated through networks of corrupt officials and criminal associates, while families were manipulated into additional payments for services ranging from enhanced security to guaranteed silence about family scandals. Some parents paid substantial sums for what they believed were insurance policies preventing their children from ever returning to embarrass the family. Father Pemberton's expansion of their corruption network during this period created a web of complicity that extended throughout Connecticut's institutional hierarchy. Beyond Sheriff DeWitt's complete corruption, the family had compromised officials in multiple counties, creating a protective buffer that could redirect investigations and suppress evidence. Judges, prosecutors, and even federal postal inspectors had been recruited through carefully orchestrated campaigns of financial incentives and blackmail that ensured their cooperation and silence. The sophistication of their document fabrication operation reached industrial levels during this peak period. Constance Pemberton had established relationships with corrupt officials in 7 states, creating the capability to produce authentic documentation supporting virtually any cover story. Birth certificates, death certificates, school transcripts, medical records, and travel documents could be generated or modified to create completely fabricated histories for their victims. This documentation network was essential for maintaining the illusion that transferred children were thriving in their new environments. Quality control procedures implemented during this period ensured that operational errors were minimized and security breaches prevented. Each case was now subjected to multiple review stages, with detailed checklists covering every aspect from initial victim selection through final evidence disposal. The family maintained comprehensive records of their procedures, victim profiles, financial transactions, and network contacts, creating a sophisticated database that guided their operational decisions and risk management strategies. The psychological conditioning of family members reached new levels of systematic desensitization during this period. Regular participation in increasingly disturbing activities, combined with ideological justification based on Father Pemberton's distorted religious interpretations, had created a family unit completely committed to their criminal enterprise. Each member had been systematically corrupted through graduated exposure to violence and moral compromise until they functioned as components of a criminal machine rather than individual moral agents. External disposal networks were expanded significantly during this peak period, creating relationships with criminal organizations throughout New England and beyond. These networks provided services ranging from document destruction to chemical disposal that extended the family's operational capabilities far beyond Connecticut's borders. Edgar had established contacts with individuals who could provide specialized equipment, dispose of problematic evidence, and even eliminate potential witnesses if circumstances required such drastic measures. If you're following this investigation into one of America's most carefully concealed institutional horrors, we need your help to ensure these suppressed stories reach the people who deserve to know the truth. The powerful forces that covered up the Pemberton family's crimes for decades don't want these revelations to spread. Hit that like button to support our research, share this video with friends who can handle these dark revelations, and subscribe with notifications enabled so you never miss our deep dives into the sinister secrets hidden in our nation's past. Together, we're building a community dedicated to exposing the truth that others tried to bury. The integration of legitimate students into their operation had been perfected to provide complete operational cover while generating additional revenue. Students from prominent families received excellent treatment and education, serving as testimonials to the school's quality while their parents' influence provided political protection. Problem students were systematically evaluated for processing potential, while intermediate cases served as a buffer population that could be manipulated if operational security required additional measures. The first serious threat to the Pemberton family's operation emerged in September 1891 when Mrs. Helena Thornfield, Margaret's mother, received an unexpected inheritance that allowed her to overcome the alcoholism that had consumed her life since her daughter's supposed transfer to California. Sober for the first time in years and racked with guilt over abandoning her child, Mrs. Thornfield began writing letters to the convent school where Margaret was allegedly studying, requesting permission to visit her daughter for Christmas. The inquiries created an immediate crisis that required sophisticated damage control. Father Pemberton's network of corrupt officials scrambled to fabricate responses from the fictional California institution, but Mrs. Thornfield's persistence in demanding specific details about her daughter's progress revealed dangerous gaps in their cover story. When she announced her intention to travel to California personally to retrieve Margaret, the family realized they faced their first potential exposure from a victim's family member who possessed both the resources and determination to uncover the truth. Edgar's solution to the Mrs. Thornfield problem demonstrated the family's willingness to escalate their criminal activities when operational security was threatened. Working through criminal contacts established during their disposal network expansion, he arranged for Mrs. Thornfield to suffer what appeared to be a tragic accident while crossing railroad tracks during a particularly heavy rainstorm. The death was attributed to her lingering health problems from years of alcohol abuse, and Sheriff DeWitt ensured that the investigation was cursory and quickly closed. The elimination of Mrs. Thornfield marked a significant evolution in the family's operational procedures. They realized that their success had created vulnerabilities that required proactive management rather than reactive crisis response. Constance Pemberton developed what she termed family monitoring protocols, systematic surveillance of victim families to identify potential threats before they could develop into serious problems. This monitoring included regular correspondence with family members, strategic cultivation of relationships with neighbors and associates, and when necessary, direct intervention to prevent dangerous inquiries. A second close call emerged when Dr. William Ashworth, David's uncle and a prominent Boston physician, began investigating his nephew's supposed transfer to a missionary program in South America. Unlike most victim families, Dr. Ashworth possessed both the professional connections and financial resources to conduct a thorough investigation. His inquiries to medical colleagues in various South American countries revealed that no missionary program matching David's supposed placement actually existed, raising immediate suspicions about the boy's true fate. The Dr. Ashworth situation required more sophisticated handling than simple elimination. His prominence in Boston medical circles meant that his death would attract significant attention and potentially trigger investigations that could expose the entire operation. Instead, Father Pemberton orchestrated a campaign of professional destruction designed to discredit Dr. Ashworth's credibility and eliminate his ability to pursue the investigation. Through their corruption network, false evidence was planted suggesting that Dr. Ashworth had been conducting illegal medical experiments and maintaining inappropriate relationships with patients. The destruction of Dr. Ashworth's reputation was achieved through a coordinated campaign involving corrupt officials, planted evidence, and carefully orchestrated media coverage. Within 6 months, he had lost his medical license, faced criminal charges that required all his attention and resources to defend against, and was ultimately committed to an asylum after suffering what appeared to be a complete mental breakdown. His inquiries about David were dismissed as the delusions of a disgraced and mentally unstable individual. The third major security threat came from within the school itself when Mary O'Brien, a kitchen maid who had worked at St. Catherine's since before the Pemberton family's arrival, began asking uncomfortable questions about the children who had been transferred to other institutions. Her long tenure at the school gave her knowledge of patterns that newer staff members might miss, and her position in the kitchen provided access to conversations and information that could expose inconsistencies in the family's cover stories. Mary O'Brien's elimination required careful planning to avoid arousing suspicion among the remaining staff members. Edgar arranged for her to suffer what appeared to be a fatal accident while working alone in the kitchen late one evening, attributed to a gas leak that caused an explosion and fire. The incident was tragic but not unprecedented in institutional kitchens of the period, and Sheriff DeWitt's investigation concluded that faulty equipment and Mary's own carelessness had caused the accident. The security improvements implemented following these close calls transformed St. Catherine's into what resembled a fortress designed to prevent both infiltration and information leakage. Edgar installed sophisticated surveillance systems that allowed the family to monitor all activities within the school, while new staff screening procedures ensured that only completely reliable individuals were hired for positions with access to sensitive information. Existing staff members were subjected to enhanced loyalty assessments, with those deemed potentially problematic transferred to other positions or eliminated through seemingly natural causes. Communication security protocols were upgraded to prevent the kind of information leakage that had nearly exposed their operation. All outgoing correspondence was monitored and controlled, while incoming mail was screened to identify potential threats before they could develop into serious problems. The family established alternative communication channels through their corruption network that could be used to intercept and redirect problematic inquiries before they reached their intended recipients. The expansion of their witness elimination capabilities reflected the family's recognition that operational security required the ability to neutralize threats at any level of escalation. Edgar's criminal network contacts provided access to individuals skilled in making deaths appear accidental or natural, while the family's corruption network ensured that investigations of suspicious deaths would be superficial and quickly concluded. These capabilities were tested and refined through the elimination of several additional potential witnesses during this period. The psychological impact of these security measures on the family members themselves was significant. The escalation from child murder to adult elimination required additional moral conditioning that pushed each family member deeper into criminal complicity. Father Pemberton's ideological justifications became more elaborate and extreme, while the family's isolation from normal human relationships intensified their dependence on each other and their shared criminal enterprise. By the end of 1892, the Pemberton family had successfully weathered their first major security crisis and emerged with enhanced operational capabilities and improved protective measures. However, the escalation of their criminal activities had also increased their exposure to risks that would ultimately contribute to their downfall. The arrival of Miss Eleanor Hartford at St. Catherine's in January 1893 introduced a variable that the Pemberton family had not encountered in their 6 years of operation. Unlike previous staff members who were either carefully vetted for compliance or gradually corrupted through systematic exposure to the family's activities, Miss Hartford possessed a combination of professional competence, moral conviction, and investigative instincts that made her immediately dangerous to their criminal enterprise. Miss Hartford's credentials were impeccable but also problematic from the family's perspective. A graduate of Mount Holyoke College with advanced training in child psychology, she had been specifically recruited by the Catholic diocese to modernize educational practices at institutions throughout New England. Her appointment to St. Catherine's was part of a broader reform initiative that Father Pemberton had been unable to prevent without arousing suspicion about his resistance to progressive educational methods. The new teacher's initial observations of the school's operations revealed inconsistencies that more compliant staff members had learned to ignore or rationalize. She noticed that student enrollment records showed frequent transfers but no corresponding arrivals to replace departed children, creating a pattern of declining population that contradicted the school's reputation for excellence. More troubling were her interactions with current students, who displayed behavioral patterns suggesting systematic psychological trauma rather than the confident improvement that should result from effective rehabilitation. Miss Hartford's professional training in child psychology allowed her to recognize signs of severe emotional distress that other observers might dismiss as typical adjustment difficulties. Several students exhibited symptoms consistent with having witnessed extreme violence, while others showed the kind of learned helplessness that resulted from prolonged psychological torture. When she attempted to discuss these observations with Father Pemberton, his responses revealed a concerning lack of knowledge about modern child development principles and an apparent indifference to student welfare. The teacher's methodical approach to investigating her concerns followed professional protocols that made her inquiries difficult to dismiss or redirect. She began maintaining detailed notes about student behaviors, staff interactions, and administrative practices that deviated from accepted educational standards. Her documentation included specific incidents, dates, and witness observations that created a comprehensive record of the school's anomalous operations. Father Pemberton's initial attempts to manage the Miss Hartford situation followed established protocols for dealing with problematic staff members. He tried to isolate her from sensitive information by restricting her access to certain areas of the school and limiting her interactions with specific students. However, these restrictions only intensified her suspicions and provided additional evidence that the school was concealing activities that required investigation. The family's assessment of Miss Hartford revealed that she presented a unique threat that could not be addressed through their standard corruption or elimination protocols. Her professional reputation and connections within the Catholic educational hierarchy meant that her disappearance or death would trigger investigations that could expose their entire operation. More dangerous was her systematic approach to documenting evidence, which suggested that she was building a case that could survive her own elimination. Constance Pemberton's psychological evaluation of Miss Hartford identified her as a principled individual whose moral convictions made her immune to the kind of financial or personal corruption that had compromised other potential threats. Her dedication to child welfare and professional integrity created motivations that could not be redirected through manipulation or intimidation. The family realized they faced an opponent who would persist in her investigation regardless of personal consequences. Edgar's surveillance of Miss Hartford revealed that she had begun reaching out to contacts outside the school to verify information about transferred students. Her inquiries to educational institutions throughout New England were systematic and professional, creating a paper trail that could eventually expose the fabricated nature of the transfer stories. More alarming was her correspondence with child welfare advocates in Boston who possessed both the resources and authority to conduct official investigations. The discovery that Miss Hartford had been copying school records and maintaining hidden documentation of her observations forced the family to accelerate their response timeline. Edgar's search of her private quarters revealed detailed notes about discrepancies in enrollment records, financial irregularities in tuition payments, and behavioral observations suggesting systematic child abuse. The documentation was sufficiently comprehensive and professionally prepared to serve as the foundation for formal charges against the school administration. Lucinda's assignment to cultivate a relationship with Miss Hartford proved unsuccessful when the teacher demonstrated an ability to recognize and resist psychological manipulation. Her professional training allowed her to identify Lucinda's techniques as calculated rather than genuine, while her moral convictions prevented her from being swayed by emotional appeals or false friendship. The failure of this approach confirmed that Miss Hartford represented a level of threat that required unprecedented countermeasures. The family's recognition that standard elimination procedures would be ineffective against Miss Hartford led to the development of more sophisticated strategies designed to discredit her professionally while neutralizing her investigation. Father Pemberton began orchestrating a campaign to portray her as mentally unstable and professionally incompetent, using his influence within the Catholic hierarchy to plant suggestions that her observations were the result of psychological problems rather than genuine discoveries. What's your reaction to this terrifying escalation in institutional corruption? The fact that respected religious and educational authorities were willing to destroy an innocent woman's life to protect their criminal enterprise shows how deeply these conspiracies penetrated our most trusted institutions. If this investigation is opening your eyes to the dark truth about historical cover-ups, hit that like button and share this video with others who need to understand how systemic corruption operated in America's past. Subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the shocking conclusion of the Pemberton family's reign of terror. The coordination of multiple corrupt officials in support of the campaign against Miss Hartford demonstrated the extent of the family's influence and the depth of institutional complicity in their crimes. Bishops, school administrators, and government officials collaborated to create false documentation supporting claims about Miss Hartford's mental instability and professional incompetence. The campaign was designed to destroy her credibility preemptively, ensuring that any future revelations she might make would be dismissed as the delusions of a disturbed individual. However, Miss Hartford's determination and professional competence proved more resilient than the family had anticipated, setting the stage for a confrontation that would ultimately threaten the entire criminal enterprise they had built over nearly a decade of systematic child murder. Miss Hartford's investigation gained unprecedented momentum in March 1893 when she discovered a critical piece of evidence that the Pemberton family had overlooked in their otherwise meticulous operations. While conducting a routine inventory of school supplies in the basement storage areas, she found a collection of personal items hidden behind loose stones in what appeared to be an unused section of the foundation. The discovery included children's clothing, toys, jewelry, and most damning, handwritten letters that had never been sent to families. The letters revealed the true fate of children who had supposedly been transferred to other institutions. Written in desperate, childish handwriting, they contained pleas for rescue, descriptions of torture, and detailed accounts of the systematic abuse being conducted in the basement facilities. Most shocking were references to other children who had simply disappeared, described in terms that suggested they had been murdered. The correspondence painted a picture of systematic child killing that contradicted every official explanation the school had provided about student transfers. Among the most significant discoveries was a journal kept by Margaret Thornfield, the 9-year-old daughter of the woman who had died in the suspicious railroad accident. Margaret's meticulous documentation of daily events revealed the true nature of the Pemberton family's operations with chilling precision. Her entries described the selection process for children marked for elimination, the psychological torture conducted during processing, and most importantly, specific details about the basement facilities that could be verified through physical investigation. Miss Hartford's analysis of the handwriting samples confirmed that multiple children had contributed to the hidden documentation, suggesting a systematic pattern of abuse rather than isolated incidents. Her professional training allowed her to recognize the psychological patterns reflected in the writing, identifying symptoms of extreme trauma that corroborated the horrific activities described in the letters. The evidence was sufficiently detailed and consistent to serve as the foundation for criminal prosecution. The teacher's careful investigation of the basement areas revealed physical evidence that supported the accounts contained in the hidden letters. Concealed drainage systems, soundproofing materials, and specialized equipment confirmed that the facilities had been designed for purposes far beyond simple student discipline. Most disturbing were chemical stains and organic residues that suggested the areas had been used for activities involving significant violence and possibly human remains. Miss Hartford's discovery that several current students had witnessed aspects of the elimination process provided living testimony that could corroborate the documentary evidence. Through careful interviews conducted under the guise of routine educational assessments, she identified children who had observed transfers that did not follow normal procedures, heard sounds from basement areas during unauthorized hours, and noticed discrepancies between official explanations and actual events. These witnesses, while traumatized and frightened, possessed information that could expose the entire operation. The most crucial witness proved to be Thomas Whitmore, a 12-year-old boy whose behavioral problems had initially marked him as a potential victim before his family's unexpected financial recovery removed him from the danger category. Thomas had been subjected to preliminary processing that included exposure to the basement facilities, giving him direct knowledge of the equipment and procedures used for elimination. His testimony provided specific details about the family's methods that could be verified through physical evidence. Miss Hartford's systematic documentation of her discoveries followed professional protocols that created an evidentiary foundation capable of surviving legal challenge. She photographed physical evidence using equipment borrowed from the school science laboratory, copied relevant documents with careful attention to preserving original formatting, and conducted witness interviews using techniques designed to ensure accuracy while protecting vulnerable children from additional trauma. Her methodology reflected the kind of thorough preparation that could support successful prosecution. The teacher's recognition that her investigation had uncovered evidence of multiple murders forced her to expand her inquiry beyond the school's internal operations. She began researching the suspicious deaths of adults who had asked questions about transferred children, identifying patterns that suggested systematic witness elimination. The deaths of Mrs. Thornfield, Dr. Ashworth's professional destruction, and Mary O'Brien's kitchen accident all exhibited characteristics that suggested deliberate murder disguised as natural or accidental causes. Miss Hartford's outreach to law enforcement contacts outside Millbrook reflected her understanding that local authorities might be compromised by the corruption network that protected the Pemberton family's operations. Her correspondence with state officials and federal authorities created multiple channels for reporting her discoveries while reducing the risk that evidence could be suppressed through local influence. This strategic approach demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the institutional protection mechanisms that had allowed the crimes to continue undetected. The development of secure communication protocols allowed Miss Hartford to share her findings with trusted contacts without alerting the Pemberton family to the scope of her investigation. She established coded correspondence with colleagues at other educational institutions, child welfare advocates in Boston, and law enforcement officials who possessed both the authority and independence necessary to act on her discoveries. These communications created a network of informed allies who could continue the investigation if she became unable to proceed. Miss Hartford's preparation of comprehensive evidence packages for multiple recipients ensured that her discoveries would survive any attempt to silence her through elimination or professional destruction. She created detailed summaries of her findings, copies of all documentary evidence, witness statements, and physical evidence samples that were distributed to contacts throughout New England. This redundant approach guaranteed that the evidence would reach appropriate authorities regardless of what happened to her personally. The teacher's analysis of the financial record she had secretly copied revealed the economic motivations underlying the Pemberton family's criminal enterprise. Detailed examination of tuition payments, asset transfers, and financial transactions demonstrated that the elimination of children generated substantial profits through multiple revenue streams. The financial evidence provided additional corroboration for the pattern of systematic murder while revealing the scope of resources available to the criminal organization. However, Miss Hartford's investigation had not gone unnoticed by the Pemberton family, whose surveillance capabilities had detected her activities despite her careful precautions. The family's recognition that she possessed evidence capable of destroying their operation triggered emergency protocols designed to eliminate the threat before it could develop into formal charges. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether decades of systematic child murder would finally be exposed or successfully concealed through the elimination of the only person capable of bringing the perpetrators to justice. The confrontation between Miss Hartford and the Pemberton family reached its crisis point in April 1893 when Edgar's surveillance revealed that she had successfully transmitted detailed evidence packages to law enforcement officials in 3 different states. The family's intercepted communications confirmed their worst fears. Miss Hartford had created a comprehensive case file documenting their crimes with sufficient detail and corroboration to trigger formal investigations that could not be suppressed through their existing corruption network. Father Pemberton's emergency family council convened in the soundproofed basement conference room to address what he termed an existential threat to their operation. The evidence Miss Hartford had compiled included not only documentary proof of their child elimination activities but also financial records demonstrating the economic motivations underlying their crimes. More dangerous was her identification of living witnesses whose testimony could provide courtroom evidence of systematic murder spanning nearly a decade. The family's assessment of their options revealed the limitations of strategies that had successfully eliminated previous threats. Miss Hartford's professional connections and systematic evidence distribution meant that her death would immediately trigger investigations by multiple law enforcement agencies, while her documented predictions about potential retaliation would focus suspicion directly on the Pemberton family. Traditional elimination procedures had become counterproductive, requiring more sophisticated approaches to neutralize the threat she represented. Constance Pemberton's proposal for dealing with Miss Hartford involved accelerating the professional destruction campaign while simultaneously implementing emergency evacuation procedures for the family's most valuable assets and evidence. The plan required coordinating multiple corrupt officials to create false documentation supporting claims about Miss Hartford's mental breakdown while preparing to abandon St. Catherine's if the situation deteriorated beyond salvage. This approach represented a significant departure from their previous strategy of maintaining operational continuity at all costs. Edgar's implementation of enhanced security measures transformed St. Catherine's into an armed fortress designed to prevent Miss Hartford from gathering additional evidence while protecting the family from potential law enforcement raids. The basement facilities were equipped with destruction mechanisms that could eliminate physical evidence within minutes, while surveillance systems were upgraded to provide early warning of approaching threats. These preparations reflected the family's recognition that their criminal enterprise faced imminent exposure. The campaign to discredit Miss Hartford's mental stability reached new levels of sophistication as the family coordinated corrupt officials throughout New England's Catholic hierarchy. Bishops were provided with fabricated documentation suggesting that she had exhibited signs of psychological instability during previous appointments, while medical professionals were recruited to provide false assessments supporting claims about her deteriorating mental condition. The campaign was designed to preemptively destroy her credibility before her evidence could receive serious consideration. Miss Hartford's recognition that she had become a target for elimination prompted her to implement protective measures that demonstrated remarkable foresight and professional competence. She arranged for trusted colleagues to receive additional evidence packages if she failed to maintain regular contact, while establishing secure communication protocols with law enforcement contacts who could provide emergency protection. Her preparations reflected understanding that exposing the Pemberton family's crimes would require surviving their attempts to silence her. The discovery that Thomas Whitmore, her key witness, had disappeared during what was described as a routine medical appointment revealed the family's willingness to eliminate children who possess dangerous information. Thomas's sudden transfer to a supposed medical facility in another state followed the same pattern as previous victim eliminations, confirming Miss Hartford's suspicions about the fate of children who threatened operational security. His disappearance also demonstrated that the family retained the capability to eliminate threats despite the increased scrutiny their operation was receiving. Miss Hartford's desperate attempt to accelerate her investigation in response to Thomas's disappearance led to increasingly dangerous confrontations with family members who were monitoring her activities. Her efforts to locate additional witnesses and gather final pieces of evidence brought her into direct conflict with Edgar, whose instructions were to prevent her from accessing any areas or individuals that could provide additional incriminating information. These confrontations escalated the immediate physical danger she faced while demonstrating her unwillingness to abandon her investigation despite mounting threats. The family's interception of correspondence between Miss Hartford and state authorities revealed that formal investigations were already beginning in Massachusetts and Rhode Island based on evidence she had provided. The communications indicated that law enforcement officials were taking her allegations seriously and had begun preliminary inquiries that could expand into full investigations if additional evidence became available. This development forced the family to consider emergency evacuation options while simultaneously intensifying their efforts to eliminate Miss Hartford before she could provide additional cooperation to investigators. Father Pemberton's decision to personally confront Miss Hartford represented a significant escalation in the family's response to the threat she posed. The confrontation, conducted in his private office under circumstances designed to appear routine, was actually an attempt to assess her psychological state and determine whether intimidation might succeed where other approaches had failed. His discovery that she remained completely committed to exposing their crimes despite understanding the personal danger confirmed that elimination was the only viable option for protecting their operation. The preparation of Miss Hartford's elimination required unprecedented coordination between family members and their criminal associates. Unlike previous victims who had been isolated and vulnerable, Miss Hartford's professional connections and documented predictions about potential retaliation meant that her death would have to appear completely natural while occurring under circumstances that would not trigger immediate suspicion. Edgar's consultation with criminal contacts throughout New England revealed the complexity of eliminating a target who had taken sophisticated precautions against exactly this scenario. Miss Hartford's final evidence transmission, completed just hours before the family's planned elimination attempt, included detailed floor plans of the basement facilities, chemical analysis of organic residues found in the processing areas, and sworn statements from surviving witnesses who had agreed to testify despite the obvious personal danger. This final package contained sufficient evidence to support criminal charges even without her personal testimony, ensuring that her investigation would continue regardless of what happened to her personally. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether nearly a decade of systematic child murder would finally be exposed through the courage and professional competence of one determined teacher, or whether the Pemberton family's criminal enterprise would survive through the elimination of the only person capable of bringing them to justice. The outcome would depend on whether Miss Hartford's precautions and evidence distribution had been sufficient to protect both her life and her investigation from the sophisticated criminal organization that had successfully concealed their crimes for so many years. The final attempt to eliminate Miss Hartford was scheduled for the evening of April 15, 1893, when Edgar had confirmed that she would be working alone in her classroom to prepare materials for what she believed would be her final evidence transmission to federal authorities. The family's plan involved staging what would appear to be a tragic accident caused by a gas leak in the school's aging heating system, similar to the method used to eliminate Mary O'Brien but refined to ensure that no physical evidence would contradict the accidental death narrative. Edgar's preparation for Miss Hartford's elimination required disabling the school's ventilation systems while creating conditions that would allow lethal gas concentrations to develop in her classroom without affecting other areas of the building. His technical expertise, developed through years of constructing specialized elimination equipment, enabled him to modify the gas delivery systems with precision timing that would ensure Miss Hartford's death while providing plausible explanations for the mechanical failure that supposedly caused the leak. However, Miss Hartford's systematic approach to personal security had anticipated exactly this scenario. Her correspondence with law enforcement contacts had included detailed predictions about potential elimination methods, complete with technical analysis of the school's infrastructure and identification of systems that could be weaponized against her. More crucially, she had arranged for a trusted colleague from Mount Holyoke College to visit the school that evening under the pretext of consulting on educational reforms, creating a witness whose presence would complicate any elimination attempt. The arrival of Professor Margaret Whitman from Mount Holyoke at 7 o'clock that evening disrupted the family's elimination timeline and forced Edgar to abort the gas leak scenario. Professor Whitman's unexpected presence in the school created an unacceptable risk that she might also become a victim or witness, while her professional prominence meant that her death would trigger investigations that could expose the entire operation. The family was forced to postpone their elimination attempt while developing alternative strategies. Miss Hartford's decision to share her complete investigation with Professor Whitman that evening represented the culmination of her evidence preservation strategy. The two educators spent hours reviewing the documentary evidence, witness statements, and physical proof that Miss Hartford had compiled, with Professor Whitman serving as both corroborating witness and backup investigator who could continue the work if Miss Hartford became unable to proceed. This collaboration created redundancy in the investigation that made eliminating Miss Hartford insufficient for protecting the family's operation. The family's surveillance of the meeting between Miss Hartford and Professor Whitman revealed the extent to which their criminal enterprise had been documented and the sophistication of the evidence preservation systems that had been established. Edgar's eavesdropping confirmed that multiple law enforcement agencies were already conducting preliminary investigations based on Miss Hartford's evidence, while her systematic distribution of materials meant that eliminating her would not prevent the evidence from reaching appropriate authorities. Father Pemberton's decision to accelerate the family's evacuation procedures reflected their recognition that the investigation had progressed beyond the point where elimination of witnesses could provide adequate protection. The systematic evidence documentation and multi-jurisdictional law enforcement involvement meant that their criminal enterprise faced imminent exposure regardless of their ability to silence individual threats. Emergency protocols were implemented to secure valuable assets, destroy incriminating evidence, and prepare escape routes that could be activated within hours. The family's attempt to eliminate physical evidence from the basement facilities revealed the challenges of concealing nearly a decade of systematic murder. Edgar's destruction of specialized equipment and chemical treatment of organic residues required sophisticated procedures that took considerable time while generating activities that could be detected by surveillance. More problematically, the structural modifications made to support their elimination operations could not be easily concealed, creating physical evidence that would survive any reasonable destruction efforts. Miss Hartford's final confrontation with Father Pemberton occurred when she discovered the family's evidence destruction activities and realized that their evacuation was imminent. Her attempt to prevent their escape by blocking access routes and alerting local authorities demonstrated remarkable courage but also revealed the limitations of individual action against a sophisticated criminal organization with extensive corruption networks. The confrontation escalated into physical violence when Father Pemberton attempted to prevent her from leaving the school grounds. The intervention of Professor Whitman and her insistence on involving state authorities rather than local officials proved crucial for preventing Miss Hartford's elimination and ensuring that the investigation would continue despite the family's escape attempts. Her professional connections provided access to law enforcement resources that could not be corrupted through the Pemberton family's local influence network, while her witness testimony corroborated Miss Hartford's evidence in ways that would be difficult to discredit through character assassination. The family's recognition that their operation had been irreversibly compromised triggered emergency evacuation procedures that had been prepared for exactly this scenario. Constance Pemberton's systematic destruction of financial records and correspondence was coordinated with Edgar's elimination of physical evidence and Father Pemberton's activation of escape routes through their criminal associate networks. However, their evacuation efforts were complicated by the simultaneous need to prevent Miss Hartford and Professor Whitman from alerting authorities before the family could reach safety. What's happening to you right now as you follow this terrifying investigation? Are you feeling that sick realization that institutions we trusted with our most vulnerable citizens were willing to commit any crime to protect their secrets? The Pemberton family's desperation shows how far these criminal networks would go to silence anyone who threatened to expose the truth. If this story is making you question what other horrors were hidden by respected authorities, hit that like button to support our mission of uncovering suppressed history. Share this investigation with friends who need to understand how systematic these cover-ups were, and subscribe with notifications so you don't miss the shocking conclusion. We're building a community of people who refuse to let these crimes stay buried. The escalating violence of the confrontation culminated when Edgar attempted to eliminate both women using methods that would appear to be the result of their interference with legitimate school operations. His attack was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of state investigators who had been dispatched based on Professor Whitman's earlier communications, creating a situation where the family's crimes were witnessed by law enforcement officials who could not be corrupted or intimidated into silence. The family's desperate attempt to fight their way past state authorities while destroying final pieces of evidence resulted in a chaotic confrontation that left Edgar seriously wounded and Father Pemberton captured, while Constance and Lucinda escaped through prepared routes that led to their criminal network contacts in neighboring states. The partial success of their evacuation meant that some family members remained at large with knowledge and resources that could be used to continue their criminal activities or eliminate surviving witnesses. The formal investigation launched by Connecticut state authorities in May 1893 revealed the full scope of the Pemberton family's criminal enterprise and exposed a corruption network that extended throughout New England's Catholic institutional hierarchy. Detective Inspector Charles Morrison, assigned to lead the investigation, described the evidence compiled by Miss Hartford as the most comprehensive documentation of systematic child murder he had encountered in 20 years of law enforcement. The investigation team included federal agents whose jurisdiction allowed them to pursue suspects across state lines and investigate the multi-jurisdictional corruption that had protected the family's operations. The excavation of St. Catherine's basement facilities provided physical evidence that corroborated every aspect of Miss Hartford's investigation. Forensic examination revealed chemical residues consistent with human decomposition, structural modifications designed for victim containment, and equipment specifically constructed for elimination purposes. Most damning was the discovery of organic remains in the private septic system that Edgar had constructed, including bone fragments and personal items belonging to children who had supposedly been transferred to other institutions. Sheriff Marcus DeWitt's arrest and subsequent confession revealed the extent of local law enforcement corruption that had enabled the family's crimes. Under interrogation, DeWitt provided detailed testimony about his role in suppressing investigations, destroying evidence, and facilitating the elimination of potential witnesses. His financial records documented payments from the Pemberton family spanning 6 years, while his personal correspondence revealed coordination with corrupt officials in multiple jurisdictions who had assisted in maintaining operational security. The investigation's expansion into neighboring states uncovered a criminal network that extended far beyond the Pemberton family's immediate operations. Federal agents identified corrupt officials in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New York who had provided false documentation, suppressed investigations, and assisted in witness elimination. The scope of institutional corruption revealed by the investigation prompted a comprehensive review of Catholic educational institutions throughout New England, leading to the discovery of additional cases of systematic abuse and cover-up. Father Pemberton's interrogation provided crucial information about the family's operational methods and the fate of specific victims. Despite his initial attempts to maintain innocence, the overwhelming physical evidence and witness testimony forced him to acknowledge his role in the systematic elimination of 12 children over 8 years. His detailed confessions included descriptions of victim selection criteria, elimination procedures, and the disposal methods used to conceal evidence of their crimes. The manhunt for Constance and Lucinda Pemberton utilized federal resources and coordination with law enforcement agencies throughout the eastern United States. Their escape through criminal network contacts had provided them with false identities and financial resources, but their distinctive appearances and specialized criminal skills made them identifiable to investigators familiar with their methods. The search revealed the sophistication of criminal networks that existed in the 1890s and their ability to facilitate long-distance transportation and identity changes for fugitives with sufficient resources. Thomas Whitmore's rescue from a criminal associates facility in Vermont provided living testimony about the family's elimination procedures and confirmed the fate of other children who had disappeared from St. Catherine's. His detailed account of the basement facilities, psychological conditioning methods, and witness elimination protocols corroborated Miss Hartford's evidence while providing additional information about the family's criminal associates and operational procedures. Thomas's survival was attributed to a delay in his processing caused by the family's focus on eliminating Miss Hartford. The financial investigation revealed that the Pemberton family had accumulated substantial wealth through their criminal enterprise, including assets hidden in accounts throughout New England and invested in legitimate businesses that provided cover for money laundering operations. The seizure of these assets provided both evidence of the economic motivations underlying their crimes and resources for compensating surviving victims and supporting ongoing investigations. The prosecution of surviving criminal associates provided additional evidence about the scope of the conspiracy and the methods used to maintain operational security. Several individuals arrested in connection with document forgery, evidence disposal, and witness elimination provided testimony in exchange for reduced sentences, revealing details about criminal networks that had operated throughout New England during the 1880s and 1890s. These prosecutions demonstrated that the Pemberton family's crimes were part of broader patterns of institutional corruption and criminal conspiracy. The investigation's impact on Catholic institutional oversight prompted significant reforms in administrative procedures and background checking requirements for personnel working with children. The Diocese of Hartford implemented new protocols for monitoring educational institutions, while other Catholic jurisdictions throughout the country adopted similar measures to prevent the kind of systematic abuse that had occurred at St. Catherine's. However, critics argued that these reforms were insufficient to address the institutional culture that had enabled such crimes to continue undetected for nearly a decade. Miss Hartford's testimony before a congressional committee investigating institutional child abuse brought national attention to the case and prompted federal legislation requiring standardized reporting procedures for suspected child abuse in educational institutions. Her detailed presentation of the evidence she had compiled, combined with Thomas Whitmore's first-hand account of the family's methods, provided lawmakers with compelling justification for federal oversight of institutions that had previously operated with minimal external supervision. The broader implications of the Pemberton case extended beyond the specific crimes committed at St. Catherine's to reveal systematic problems in institutional oversight and law enforcement coordination that had enabled similar crimes throughout the country. Federal investigators identified patterns of corruption and cover-up in multiple jurisdictions that suggested the Pemberton family's methods were not unique, prompting expanded investigations that would continue for several years. The psychological impact on surviving students from St. Catherine's required extensive treatment and support services that were unprecedented in 1890s America. The development of specialized counseling programs for child trauma victims represented one of the first systematic approaches to addressing the long-term effects of institutional abuse, establishing protocols that would influence treatment methods for decades to come. The capture of Lucinda Pemberton in Chicago 6 months after her escape provided closure to one aspect of the case while raising new questions about the criminal networks that had sheltered the family. Her interrogation revealed additional details about the family's operations and confirmed the fate of several victims whose disappearances had not been fully documented. However, Constance Pemberton remained at large, presumably protected by criminal associates who had successfully concealed her identity and location. The final trials of Father Pemberton and his surviving associates concluded in February 1895, with convictions on multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and corruption. The sentences included death penalties for the primary perpetrators and lengthy prison terms for accomplices, representing one of the most comprehensive prosecutions of institutional child abuse in American legal history. However, the knowledge that some perpetrators had escaped justice and that similar crimes might be occurring at other institutions left investigators and victims' families with an incomplete sense of resolution. The execution of Father Matthias Pemberton on March 12, 1896, marked the official conclusion of one of the most horrific cases of institutional child murder in American history, but the legacy of the Pemberton family's crimes would continue to influence child protection policies and institutional oversight for generations. His final statement, delivered from the gallows at Connecticut State Prison, contained no expression of remorse for the 12 children whose lives he had systematically destroyed, instead maintaining that his actions had been justified by what he termed divine mandate to eliminate society's unwanted elements. The demolition of St. Catherine's boarding school in 1897 was attended by hundreds of spectators who came to witness the destruction of a building that had become synonymous with institutional evil. The basement facilities where 12 children had been tortured and murdered were filled with concrete before demolition began, creating a permanent seal over the physical evidence of crimes that had shocked the nation. The land was eventually donated to the town of Millbrook for use as a memorial park, though many residents felt that the ground itself had been too contaminated by evil to serve any constructive purpose. Miss Eleanor Hartford's transformation from educator to nationally recognized child welfare advocate represented one of the few positive outcomes of the horrific case. Her courage in exposing the Pemberton family's crimes, despite enormous personal risk, established her as a leading voice for institutional reform and child protection. She spent the remainder of her career developing standardized protocols for identifying and reporting suspected child abuse, creating training programs for educators and social workers, and advocating for federal oversight of institutions serving vulnerable populations. The broader investigation triggered by the Pemberton case revealed that systematic child abuse had occurred at numerous Catholic institutions throughout New England, suggesting that the family's crimes were part of a larger pattern of institutional corruption and cover-up. Federal investigators identified at least 6 other cases where children had disappeared from religious institutions under suspicious circumstances, leading to prosecutions that extended well into the 20th century. These discoveries confirmed that the Pemberton family's methods were not unique and that similar crimes had been concealed by institutional authorities throughout the country. Thomas Whitmore's survival and subsequent testimony provided crucial evidence for multiple prosecutions while highlighting the long-term psychological impact of institutional trauma. His detailed accounts of the elimination procedures and psychological conditioning methods used by the Pemberton family became essential components of training programs for law enforcement and child welfare professionals. Despite extensive counseling and support, Thomas never fully recovered from his experiences, spending his adult life advocating for stronger protections for vulnerable children. The financial reparations paid to victims' families from seized Pemberton assets established important precedents for institutional liability in cases of systematic abuse. The legal proceedings that determined compensation amounts created frameworks for calculating damages in child abuse cases that would influence court decisions for decades. However, many families felt that no amount of money could adequately address the loss of their children or the betrayal of trust that had enabled such crimes to occur. Constance Pemberton's continued evasion of law enforcement became a source of ongoing concern for investigators and victims' families who feared that she might resume criminal activities in other locations. Periodic reports of suspicious disappearances at institutions throughout the Midwest and West Coast prompted investigations that never definitively confirmed her involvement but suggested that individuals with her specialized knowledge might be continuing similar criminal enterprises. Her case remained open until her presumed death in the 1920s, though her body was never recovered or definitively identified. The institutional reforms implemented in response to the Pemberton case transformed oversight procedures for educational and religious institutions throughout the United States. Mandatory background checks for personnel working with children, standardized reporting requirements for suspected abuse, and regular inspections by independent authorities became standard practices that significantly reduced the likelihood of systematic crimes going undetected. However, critics argued that these reforms addressed symptoms rather than the underlying institutional cultures that had enabled such crimes. The psychological research conducted on surviving victims and perpetrators contributed to developing understanding of institutional abuse patterns and trauma responses that influenced treatment approaches for decades. The case provided early evidence for concepts that would later be recognized as institutional abuse syndrome, demonstrating how systematic exposure to violence and corruption could normalize criminal behavior among both perpetrators and victims. This research became foundational for developing therapeutic interventions for institutional trauma survivors. The media coverage of the Pemberton case marked a turning point in public awareness of institutional child abuse and the need for stronger protections for vulnerable populations. Newspaper accounts of the trials and investigations brought unprecedented attention to the systematic nature of the crimes and the institutional failures that had enabled them to continue undetected. This coverage helped build public support for the legislative reforms and institutional changes that followed the case. The establishment of the Hartford Foundation for Child Protection in 1899, funded by contributions from across the country, created a permanent legacy dedicated to preventing similar crimes through education, advocacy, and support for abuse survivors. The foundation's work included training programs for institutional personnel, research on abuse prevention methods, and legal advocacy for stronger child protection laws. Miss Hartford served as the Foundation's first director until her retirement in 1925. What does this horrific chapter of American history teach us about the institutions we trust with our most vulnerable citizens? The Pemberton family's crimes were enabled by a culture of unquestioning deference to authority and institutional secrecy that allowed systematic murder to continue for nearly a decade. Their story reminds us that evil can flourish behind facades of respectability when good people fail to ask difficult questions and demand accountability from those in positions of power. If this investigation has opened your eyes to the importance of protecting vulnerable populations and holding institutions accountable, share this story with others who need to understand these lessons from our past. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you can continue learning about the hidden histories that shaped our nation. Together, we can ensure that the courage of people like Miss Hartford continues to inspire those who fight for justice and protection of the innocent. The enduring impact of the Pemberton case extended far beyond the specific crimes committed at St. Catherine's, fundamentally changing how American society approached institutional oversight and child protection. The systematic nature of the crimes and the extensive corruption network that protected them demonstrated the need for independent monitoring and transparent accountability in institutions serving vulnerable populations. While the passage of time has obscured many details of the case, its influence on modern child protection systems ensures that the courage of those who exposed these crimes continues to protect children more than a century later. The 12 children who died at the hands of the Pemberton family were finally honored with a memorial erected in Millbrook's Town Square in 1923, 30 years after their murders were exposed. The simple granite monument bears their names and the inscription, "In memory of innocents lost to institutional evil, and in honor of those who courageously sought truth and justice." Their legacy serves as a permanent reminder that protecting society's most vulnerable members requires eternal vigilance and the courage to confront evil wherever it hides behind facades of respectability and authority.